It doesn't always,
Yeah,
and I want to kind of yield to you already the point that if it doesn't get any deeper, I just hate the conversation. If it's
yeah.
superficial the whole way through, but if it is filled with transitions to slightly more intimate conversation that can really change the people a little bit, means something, cause an improvement in their day,
Hmm.
that's its use.
Yeah. Well, this is the worst debate ever. But my first thought was, I agree with you. Actually, I think. Hey, everybody. I'm Cody.
And I'm Evan,
Welcome back to Men's Search for Meaning.
the podcast where we explore concepts that we can all relate to and walk away with a deeper understanding of ourselves and what we think. All right, so I was thinking about small talk, and you and I have talked about this before, and
Oh,
it
yes.
immediately brings opinions. And I think I casually consider this idea quite a lot of like the value or role of small talk in our society, because for work, I constantly have sales meetings where there's somebody sitting in a Zoom room and we're waiting for someone else. And it's like, do we just say, oh, we're still waiting for so and so? And then just to be totally silent and awkward? Sometimes that
Yeah.
happens. But, if you're not doing that, you pretty much have to have small talk.
Yeah.
And I'm always self conscious about it. I can
Interesting.
do it, but
Yeah.
I'm always aware. I'm always like self aware, like, oh shit, I'm about to comment on my local weather or ask,
Yeah.
oh, what part of the world are you in? It's like I know how to do it, but it's a little painful for me because I much prefer substantial conversation. So, what's your overall feeling on small talk? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, first, that's very interesting. For people who don't know us very well, I am terrible at small talk. Just I can't stand it. Maybe I can make it work, but like what you pointed out, it's just too painful in the process. But you are excellent at small talk, and that's not an insult of any kind. Um, you're also very good at in-depth communication as well. So it's not to say that you're good at one and not the other, but you're very good at small talk, and it's interesting to hear that it's something that you find so uncomfortable because you come across very comfortable and confident in small talk. So I just wanted to point that out. My opinion of small talk is it is a necessary evil to some degree that I avoid whenever possible, under any and all circumstances. I try to avoid small talk all the time because I feel like I just feel every second going by. I don't care about what the conversation is, and I'm just thinking, how do I get this conversation to something more interesting or substantial? Or is it possible with this person to have a conversation that is interesting or more substantial? Because we don't all click with all kinds of people, and sometimes that just isn't going to work with the wrong person. So, my feelings of small talk: hate it, try to avoid it as much as possible. I do realize that it has benefits, and there have been times where, think of any of your best friends or relationships in your life. At one point, you were talking to that person and you didn't know them and had to make conversation or felt compelled to make conversation, or somehow small talk was the beginning of something that became more meaningful. And perhaps it very quickly moved away from small talk, and that's why someone felt drawn to a particular person. But it does play a role in all of our lives. So I think this is a fantastic topic and one that I'm really excited to talk about.
I find it very funny that you absolutely hate it. I don't like it
Yeah.
either. I consider it just something that is just, just like, oh, that's unfortunate. Like if you have to go into a building and there's like 45 stairs in front of you, I'm just like, all right, I guess I'm just going to walk up 45 stairs right now.
Mm.
Don't particularly want to, but I'm going to. Um, but I think for you, you're just like, oh, that is about to happen. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
going to get ready for this.
Yeah, if we use the same analogy, maybe it's like walking upstairs while carrying a stack of like 20 pizzas, and I've got my coffee in one hand, and it's just like, each step is that much more
Ooh,
not well, challenging to some degree, but also just painful and undesirable because yeah, I just don't get anything from it. I'm someone, part of the reason why we enjoy doing these talks to begin with is to dive deeper into subjects and really explore things. and small
Mhm.
talk to me is usually the opposite of that. Maybe we should try some small talk right now, and just maybe I'll take your
Okay.
lead here because you are the expert and
All
I'm
right. You
I'm the
ready?
student. Yeah, I'm ready.
Beautiful day today.
Oh yeah, it's nice. I didn't get outside that much actually.
You busy working?
Yeah, just yeah, I guess so. Kind of a busy, busy day.
Hold on, I was about to hit you with a
Oh yeah, yeah,
super annoying thing. Let me do my annoying thing.
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, busy's good.
Oh yeah, got to make that money, huh? Got to pay those bills somehow.
Hey, better than the alternative.
Yeah. I think what I'm noticing in trying this is that it leans on so many generic tropes that it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it's actually genuinely happening. It feels like you're using a soundboard. Like you have a soundboard and you press beautiful day today and it just comes
Right.
out in a very generic way. And I think that's why I have such a hard time with small talk. And maybe that's true for people watching as well, as it doesn't it doesn't feel do you see what I'm getting at? I can't quite figure out how to describe that. It like doesn't feel meaningful in that sense. It just feels like you're saying what's been said endlessly already, and there's something that's so much less interesting. Is that the way you view it as well? Why it doesn't align with you personally, or is it something
Hmm.
else? Because
No, I
that's
feel a
what it
little
is for me.
differently.
I'm like, there's
Yeah.
zero novelty here whatsoever, zero interest, zero novelty. It's like trying to swim in a millimeter of water.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, that it's just literally a custom that you're going through the paces to perform,
Hmm.
and nothing meaningful will come from it. You're just going to do it because it's what you have to do in this social moment, and
Yep.
it's just a waste of time. Um, so I get what you're saying. I feel a little bit differently.
Hmm.
I again, it's a little uncomfortable because I so much prefer genuine conversation. But when I'm witnessing someone who is adept at small talk, and I've noticed many people are pretty good at it,
Hmm.
I sort of admire the fact that someone can do that and seem genuinely interested. And, I'll be like, yeah, beautiful day. And they'll be like, I know, right? Oh, it has been unseasonably beautiful. And I keep telling my husband, and I'm just like, wow, you seem engaged by this conversation. I bet some people are. So
Yeah.
I observe something about people based on their small talk ability and based on how engaged they are. I mean, I might end up feeling like they're pretty superficial because they love small talk.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes it is like a dance. It's like the beginning of like slightly getting to know somebody.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I take something from it I like. That's about observing people's behavior, which is something I enjoy a lot.
Yeah, you knowing me quite well, I am interested in the skill of it, and that there are some people that do that well. I think anyone who's good at something, I can find something interesting about. Um,
Hmm.
so I do see what you're saying there, and that is true for me as well, of kind of admiring people who are good at that. And I thought about that with you as well. Like there was a time that we were staying in England together, and we were going from the Cotswolds into London. You had a meeting that day, and I was tagging along with my girlfriend to just hang out in London for the day and actually meet somebody. And we had just a horrible taxi driver that had very
Mm.
strong opinions. And like from the first couple minutes of the drive, he was not shy about sharing any of those things. And you were sitting in the front with him, and you made very convincing conversation for probably more than 1 hour with this person who had offensive opinions. And I imagine you were also trying to not laugh, because I'm sure you were imagining what I was thinking in the back seat as
Yes, I
well. And so
was.
not only
Yes, I
holding that
was.
together, but keeping this person engaged in conversation. And I would say he was none the wiser that there was any parallel thread going on in your mind about what a ridiculous person he was.
Mm.
But again, I was like, man, I don't know how he does it. I wouldn't be able to do this. I would think of some excuse of, oh, I need to finish some work. I need to do something just to shut that down as quickly as possible. And
Mm.
you managed to make it work. Any thoughts on that experience?
Well, I think it's a hybrid experience. By the way, for those watching, just to give a sense of what this guy was like, we got into the cab. You know, we're two Americans, and this guy, of course, is a local Englishman. And he immediately was like, you guys American? And we were like, yeah. And he's just like, oh, Americans, they're awful, or something like that. And I was just like, do you expect us to relate to that and agree with that? Like, oh, yeah, I know, hate those men, hate myself.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that was just an interesting, entree to the conversation. But yeah, there's a few things that I think got me through that, and I didn't like it, by the way.
Mhm.
But first, I was just interested in this curmudgeonly human being a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I was just like, if I keep talking and basically giving him license to share more about his thoughts and beliefs, I'm going to get to know a mind I would not otherwise know. And
Mhm.
I don't really want to get to know this mind, but there's something interesting about
Mhm.
like this, kind of small town English guy, who's, I don't know, in his 60s or something like that. And I just don't meet people like that very much. I'm sure he doesn't travel to the US since he hates the US. So I wouldn't have the chance to meet him any other way.
Uh-huh.
So I was a little interested.
Yeah.
And then I have enough experience in my life talking to people who are kind of narcissistic and can't stop talking about themselves. You know, those people that like
Mhm.
you can't have a conversation. They don't ask you questions about yourself.
Mhm.
That I think I've had to put up with that enough in my life that I'm just like, okay, I've got a mode I can go into where I humor them. I think other people have told me that they can do this type of thing too. So it's not, totally uncommon. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's really enjoying it, but they're kind of in there. Okay, it's a talker mode, and I'm going to
Uh-huh.
just humor this person. That's pretty much just doing that.
It sounds like you mentioned not enjoying it. It sounds like the cost for you is low, would you say, in navigating a lengthy situation with someone that you ultimately have nothing in common with? Maybe some disparate things in common, but for
Mm.
me, the cost would be tremendously high, where that that would affect the rest of my day, having to put in that level of energy. Do you feel differently? Just being more of an extroverted person who's um, generally can communicate more for a larger portion of the day? Because it sounds like it costed you something, but I'm curious
Yeah.
your perception of that degree of cost.
Yeah, I'd say 2 to 5% of my energy for the day was taken by a 1 hour conversation with a, grumpy guy.
Yeah,
I think for you, it might have been like 40%.
that's what
It
it
would
would
have
feel
like
like.
ruined your day. Um, so yeah, there's a big difference, I guess, between my being more extroverted, you being more introverted. I don't mean to just totally use that brush to paint it, but I think it's one quick way to paint a
Yeah,
difference between us.
I think it's fair as well. I think I would generally align with that. I feel a little bit like an extroverted introvert, where primarily introverted, but in the right context. Like if that was a person that had some bizarre interest that I found fascinating and wasn't such an unpleasant person, I could very much carry out that conversation for a long period of time. But I feel like I would have to be getting something out of that. And that it sounds like you were getting something out of it. You said it's interesting to hear, curmudgeonly people talk because you get to find out about that this person exists and this is what their life is like or something. I think I have to have more overlap with interests to be able to do that. But just to add that in the right context, I can talk about um, topics with someone I don't know well. Maybe that's where it gets away from small talk a bit. In that I would want um, to have more of a say in what the topic of conversation was, and then I can be sustained. But ultimately, I agree with those labels, and I think that's probably explains some of the difference that we're seeing here.
Yeah, and if I could, this is bringing up for me a thought about like the role of small talk, or the possibility of small talk, because I actually think it has some utility.
Yeah,
I mean, it has utility, and it's just like a little bit of social lubricant where you can, start getting into a conversation with somebody if you have to talk about, business, or you're meeting up to exchange something, whatever it is. You
yeah,
don't have to just be totally cold and be like, "Hi, where is the folder I need?" or whatever.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I have an idea maybe that we can try.
sure.
Um, since you are generally someone who is more extroverted and more skilled at small talk, and I would consider myself more introverted and want to run far away from small talk. Let's have a sort of gentle debate on the subject where you
Hmm.
push in favor of small talk, which it sounds like what you're about to do. And I'll maybe, maybe we're each overextending a little bit from what we actually think about it, but see what comes up as a result of
Yeah,
that. You want to try that?
totally down.
All right, you're up
All right.
and you're going
So,
down.
we'll see about that, mister. So I think that small talk has social utility in that people cannot just make large leaps into intimate conversation. It's too difficult for the human psyche to do.
Mhm.
Um, so, whereas someone may start out with, oh, the traffic getting here, it's the most general chit chat possible, they can slowly inch their way towards, do you live around here? Which is just a little more intimate than the
Yeah,
traffic is bad, right? Then you get to, you live around here. And then maybe you keep going and it becomes something like, oh, so are you in school? What are you studying? Or what type of work do you do?
yeah,
Um, and then maybe a comment about that. I've always felt that this neighborhood, it has a lot of character, and people here love music, and that's something I admire. It's like, and it can get deeper and deeper. It doesn't always,
yeah.
and I want to kind of yield to you already the point that if it doesn't get any deeper, I just hate the conversation. If it's
Yeah.
superficial the whole way through, but if it is filled with transitions to slightly more intimate conversation that can really change the people a little bit, means something, cause a improvement in their day,
Hmm.
that's its use.
Yeah. Well, this is the worst debate ever. But my first thought was, I agree with you. Actually, I think, um, yeah, I have a complicated opinion on that. I think ultimately what you're describing is true, and I just think I wish it were different.
Mm,
There's something about that, like getting to know someone phase, where I just want to get through that stage and get to the part where
yeah.
you relate more. And I think there's no way to shortcut that. It's something I've thought a lot about, not just finding a way to shortcut that, but that communication is sort of a dance in general, and there needs to be a certain kind of progression. If you could get somewhere in a conversation that started via small talk that if you asked bluntly would be received very poorly. And I think I
Hmm.
just don't like that that's the case, and I often gravitate towards people who are generally more comfortable up front with talking about a wider range of topics than people
Hmm.
that require so many steps to get to it. And in some ways I wish that were different, because what you're pointing out is very true, I think. And as I mentioned earlier, some important friendships and relationships can come from that. Obviously, there's a bit of a give and take. Like you said, it doesn't always lead to something more. And so if you're not getting something back, then it becomes more unpleasant. And that to me would demonstrate a misalignment in terms of personalities. Um, but yeah, I think ultimately we both yielded within the first minute of the debate. But I think ultimately that is true. It does take a little bit of warming up for people to be comfortable expressing things, and I just think I sort of dream of a world where that doesn't have to happen. But I could see that being not the way I imagined it to be, and could actually be uncomfortable and strange in a way that's hard to perceive. If people were just completely blunt about what they were saying, I think there's some room in the middle. Um, I think increasingly more. Maybe this is not true. It's hard to determine whether something is a trend or not. Like I was going to say, I think increasingly people are less comfortable speaking about themselves, but then I can imagine someone saying, "Oh, but we're more open with therapy as a society, and um, pursuing directions in life that are more personally fulfilling." So that would imply an openness. But I've just noticed a shift in conversation of people wanting to say things more vague. Maybe it's somewhat just the newer generation. Um, but yeah,
Mm.
there's a complex relationship with human psychology and vulnerability, or openness. And some people require a lot of, maybe there's trust built in the process of small talk. you're gaining information from the person you're talking to. If you're someone who's more hesitant to open up, you're gaining a trust factor in talking to someone and them not acting crazy or unpredictable, and that allows you to open up a little bit more and a little bit more. And I think I'm more someone who's just willing to be like, let's put it out there and see if we get along or not, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something we totally have in common. We don't like the fact that uh, almost all the time you have to start with small talk to slowly build trust, being
Hmm.
more vulnerable and talking about deeper things. But I think I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm curious if you have examples of this. To think about the times when you have skipped the small talk with somebody. This hasn't happened many times in my life.
Yeah.
Uh, it's happened in okay, so it's happened in like sort of a dating context. Back when I was dating in my 20s, there'd be some times when like I guess the person, this girl would not want to waste time. Like, I want to know if you're someone I'm interested in, so like get deep very quickly.
Hmm.
And I think often if you try to get deep very quickly, it's too hot and heavy. It crashes and burns fairly quickly because you haven't built the foundation for it.
Yeah.
But having said that, I want to disagree with myself and not say it as a general rule, because I really do believe that there is a way to start just a bit deeper and to, yes, earn trust. In fact, you can talk about deep things in an invulnerable way. Unfortunately, I've learned that myself since I have trouble being vulnerable. A good amount of the time, and I think I've made a lot of progress. But
Hmm.
I've had times where I've talked to people that will share stuff that they talk about in therapy, and it feels good for them to do that, but they're not exactly like opening themselves up when they say it. They're just saying things that sound very vulnerable.
Hmm.
So, um, there's all kinds of different levels of real openness, but I do think it's
Yeah.
possible to start a little deeper. I mean, I think our friendship probably was that way. I actually don't remember.
Yeah, I don't fully remember either because it happened over a period of years of just being the plus ones of two other friends, you know,
Hmm.
and so we were just around each other. And so I imagine there was some actually no, very funny story that I just remembered. The very first time we met, we were doing a makeup New Year's
Uh-huh.
because I had been sick before and we had planned to get together. And this was the first time that my girlfriend was going to introduce me to you
Uh-huh.
and your wife. And I think one of the first things you asked me after we sat down at the restaurant was, "Do you want to do a lightning round?" And I was like, "What? What is a lightning round?" And you're like, "Well, I have a series of questions that I like to ask people in a lightning format where you answer as quickly as possible." So I would say that is probably the least traditional beginning to a friendship that we didn't even realize at that point would be a friendship, but um, that was probably a good bonding moment because I was like, "Oh wow, so much more interesting than, oh, what do you do for work? Oh wow, that sounds interesting. Do you like
Yeah.
do you like this food? Yeah, potatoes are good, huh?" It's just like, oh, you were like, "Hey, I'm gonna be open and I want to ask you questions in rapid succession," and you answer very quickly.
Yeah, that's because I really like to learn about new people, and you were this interesting, important new person. And so I was like, "Oh, I want to get to know him." And it is a bit aggressive to say I'm going to basically give you a lightning round quiz of like questions about your life. So yeah, that's my style a little bit. I can be aggressive, and I was more so, I think, 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah,
Uh, but I'm glad that it really did end up sharing something about my personality I think jives with yours, which is
yeah,
you did not get the small talk. You got the you got the real curiosity.
yeah. And I was like, "Oh, this is unusual and interesting." And while I was the one answering the questions, I got to learn something from hearing the questions that were asked because they weren't all just mundane questions. They were more. I think if I can't remember if I'm mixing this up, but it was one of the questions, would you rather be a person with the mind of a strawberry or a strawberry with the mind of a person? Is that one of
Yeah,
the
basic.
questions?
Yeah, almost exactly that. Yes.
So yeah, in my mind, I was like, this is very interesting. This is unusual, but I think I prefer the unusual and um, kind of palpable instead of the like people using like that was a very unique aspect of your personality that you demonstrated via conversation as opposed to using the soundboard approach of small talk and just pressing buttons that were tied to phrases that everyone's said and heard so many times, you know? Um, so yeah, definitely something that I resonated. And that's probably the best example we could have come up with of a time of skipping small talk and what the
Mm,
outcome of that was. But I think typically, just to your point from before, I would imagine dating to be one of the contexts where that would be more likely to happen because typically, maybe not typically, but often in dating, people are looking for some sort of long term outcome, right? So there's more of a pressure on compatibility, whereas I feel like friends just kind of, again, typically or often, friends just kind of drift together. You have similar interests, you work at the same place, you meet doing one of your hobbies, you know, but there's not this expectation of like, we're going to be friends for years, you know, usually it just
no.
happens. So I think it would be more uncommon to kind of jump the gun and try to, you know, really get to know someone quickly, unless that's just your style and you're willing to accept, you know, if there are any consequences for certain people approaching it that way.
Right.
But there's less of an expectation of sort of commitment, I guess, whereas relationships, there's more of that. And so people kind of want to feel like, am I wasting my time here? Or is there a good degree of compatibility? Because often you want even more compatibility in a, you know, relationship, romantic relationship than in a friendship. So yeah, I think I agree with you there for those reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to think how quickly you really can move. Again, I keep going back to like the times when you try to get deep very quickly and
Hmm.
it sort of is performative and it can ultimately fizzle. Um, but you know what's funny is that even though I know that, I continuously try to have slightly deeper talk, even the first time I meet somebody, which is possibly not a good idea. But I feel like at least I'm self-selecting or I'm
Hmm.
selecting out people when I do that. So, for instance, for those that don't know me, I moved to New York from the Bay Area like a year and a half ago, and that's where Cody is in the Bay Area. Um, and when I meet people, sometimes they say, "Oh, where do you live? Did you grow up here?" During the small talk phase when I first meet them, and I say, "Actually, I grew up here, but then I lived in the Bay Area for 13 years." And they say, "Oh, how do you like it? That's a really different move, to come to New York from the Bay Area."
Hmm.
And I say, I really enjoy the culture. And I talk a little bit about that. And that starts to get a bit deeper because enjoying the culture says something about your values.
And
Most of the time,
there's an
yeah.
opening there that they're giving that can be they're asking a question that can be answered very superficially or
Hmm.
with more depth. So I don't know if they're
Right.
doing that intentionally or it's something they learn subconsciously, but I imagine that's what you're describing with the opportunity is like here's a chance where I can say something a little bit deeper to see how someone's going to respond, even though they've also set me up to go, oh yeah, I love it here. It's beautiful. The trees, so nice, you know, very
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. It does because a lot of people have asked me that because I think they find it unusual, this particular move of this part of New York from, I guess, a kind of big city cosmopolitan place that's West Coast, different feel out there.
Yeah.
Um, but people do ask me that a lot. I agree they are giving a kind of opening. There's a
Mhm.
curiosity that they seem to genuinely have. And I pretty much always say something that shares a little bit about my values, what I care about,
Mhm.
which invites a bit of a deeper conversation. And I think almost never or never has somebody fully engaged on that level.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm going to keep doing it. I mean, I don't think I'm just being a crazy person that is repeating something that is not working conversationally because people I've done that with, I've gone on to become friends with them. But
Yeah.
uh, I I still hope that eventually somebody says something more meaningful and I meet somebody that is interested in having deeper conversation because that's
Yeah.
actually what I'm seeking, even though it's quite rare apparently.
I think it's a good thing to do to continue the approach that you that selects for the encounters you would like to have instead of letting it wear you down and being like, oh, I'm not going to try that anymore. It doesn't work. I think it's
Hmm.
important to keep up that consistency. And it was interesting that you said, oh, I don't know if I'm being a crazy person, trying something that isn't working.
Hmm.
It sounds like something that just has a low likelihood because many people, it takes them a long time to warm up. But I
Yeah.
think I align strongly with that approach as well of just continue to put yourself in the positions that would allow you to find people that you would gravitate towards most. And when it doesn't happen, you're learning something important as well. So even when that attempt is not successful, well, you've learned this is a person that potentially is not very interested in communicating on that sort of level. And I want to add for other people watching that I don't want to speak for you either, but I don't think there's an appropriate level of communication that you need to be communicating at a certain level for it to be worthwhile. I think everyone has their own personal definitions of what that is, and the answer here is really just to find what that is for you, and that's what I like that you're doing in that situation is you're leading by example. You're doing what you hope other people would do, and that's the level that you would like to be at. And if you're someone who loves small talk, that's great as well. I sat in front of some people on a plane coming out to visit you guys that there were two people traveling together and they didn't know the third, and they talked the entire 6+ hours. And maybe there was a decent amount of effort put in to continue that, but it sounds like that's what they enjoyed doing. I know there's a lot of people that like learning about different people, and I just wanted to add that we don't think there's an appropriate depth of how that should happen. If you're comfortable at whatever level of communication, then that's exactly the right way to do it. Would you agree with that as well?
I would, yeah. I mean, just because you and I are on the same page that we prefer deeper conversation, which is why we would have conversations like these. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean it's like right. I mean, we need all different types of people, different comfort levels to make the world go round. So yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
yeah. I wanted to come back to one more thing. We're probably getting um, towards the end of our time, but I wanted to come back to the thing you mentioned of I like that in the moment you were kind of exploring new territory and thinking, what is the fastest something like that can move and still be successful? Because it sounds like you've had experience of that being expedited and the results generally not being good.
Mm,
Um, and I think there is something to say. I think you can definitely go too fast in ways
mm,
that it doesn't come across at the time, but you're quickly in sort of unfamiliar territory, and that's when things can take a turn. So there's definitely something to be said of building up a foundation of comfort with someone, and I think
hmm.
it really depends on the two people involved and what their levels are. Is there a situation where two people could just talk about whether or not God exists right on the first time meeting and still have a friendship or a romantic relationship or something? I think yes, but I think it would be uncommon to just break down so many typical cultural barriers and have that ultimately turn out successfully. But it's an interesting thought to explore of how much of this kind of foundation building via more generic conversation is necessary. And I don't think there's an answer to that, or at least a simple answer, but it's something that's very interesting to think about. And I think I generally align with things take time. People are complicated, their views and beliefs are complicated, and it can just take time for you to see how you align with someone, or maybe you speed some things up, or you get to a certain point of more involved conversation and then you have some more generic kind of stuff. I just think because of how complex and complicated many people are, there's just some time it takes to build a foundation that can sustain really open explorative conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I think things can move towards greater conversational depth or openness quicker than most people are comfortable with.
That's
But
probably
you
true.
really you really have to calibrate and kind of I'd say make a mistake if you're someone like me or you and you want a little bit more depth. and go a little too far. I don't know if you've done that before. I've done it before.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, oh yeah. And I've learned something. It's like the social feedback. When you do something socially that's a mistake or doesn't work out, that's what it's all about. Then you learn from that and you recalibrate your social behavior. And
Yeah.
so I think I've maybe tried to go too deep on something, and you very quickly will get that feedback where people are like, or something like that. And
Hmm.
and I think that's okay too. But there have been times when I did go deeper with people and it seemed to work out. And then the next time I saw them, we needed to be superficial, or maybe the next 5 times I saw them, we needed to be more superficial because we skipped a level or two. We talked about ideologies or values or things that we deeply feel. Um, so it is interesting. Bless you. It is
Thank you.
interesting that sometimes you're just forced, even if you try to skip a step, to kind of go back and ultimately have the same trajectory.
Yeah.
But I don't think you always have to go, like it takes 5 years to get deep or something, as many
Yeah.
relationships do go that way. That's a very common male relationship thing, I would say. 5 years, 10 years to
Yeah.
actually talk about deeper things.
If ever.
If ever
Yeah.
on your deathbed, I never told you about this thing that, really bums me out.
Yeah. I never
Um,
told you that you're a good friend and I appreciate you.
Now you take that information and I'm gonna go die. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is just a sad commentary, but
Yeah.
darkly true. Um, but yeah, so I do think it actually can go faster, but it can't go too fast. I think that's my point.
Yeah. And I have to piggyback off that because again, I just find this so interesting. Um, Bringing the gender part into it is a factor. I don't think you
Mm,
can make any rules for how that goes because I think all all people, regardless of gender, have difficulties being open or are more comfortable with one type of person or another type of person. But it just goes to show how many variables there are, and it's definitely a stereotype that male friendships are more like, "Hey, did you watch a game last night?" and like,
mhm.
don't want to talk about anything more than that. And not to say there's anything wrong with that either, but it's definitely a stereotype, and it just really depends on so many things how something can progress because there's how often do you see this person, is it generally a good experience when you see them, is it tense, is are they going through something, there's so many different factors, what's their personal experience in different areas, there's so many factors that affect how much comfort someone will have in entering into new situations or perhaps pushing past depths of conversation that they typically weren't comfortable with but are making strides towards being open. There's just so much to it, but because of that I think it's a very interesting topic to explore. It's infinitely complex. This is something that we all experience in probably our daily lives, but it's still almost impossible to draw general rules or conclusions from that because it's infinitely complex. But I think that's exactly why we are interested in exploring this in a conversation together and for a broader audience as well. So good opportunity. If you guys have any thoughts about this conversation, as always, you don't need to wait for a prompt, but please include those in the comments below. Part of what we're trying to do in exploring these conversations together is to learn more from other perspectives. And so we really want to hear from you guys as well. Um, in terms of that. So feel free to add that stuff in the comment section below, and we'd be very interested in reading that and expanding our own view on things. I think which we're both open to doing. Any other thoughts that you wanted to add to wrap up here? Anything that?
I'll just respond very briefly because it's a whole
Yeah.
subject that I don't want to open up. But I do think that there's general differences between men and women and how open they can be. Like I don't want to totally let you get away with like, oh, it's infinitely complex. All people are different. That is
Okay.
true. That there are people that buck the trend of what generally is true, which in my opinion is that men have a much harder time, being intimate in conversation for a really long period of time, often years.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that women get to, like, in my opinion, a really deep place quicker than men because they may stay at the level of, talking about people and their opinion on things, uh, and events that have happened socially or whatever. I mean, like, and also like, just being like, oh, I was really sad today, type of thing. Like that's a pretty
Mhm.
intimate thing to say that like almost no man ever says. And
Hmm.
I believe I've heard women do that, within like a month of knowing each other pretty easily. And by the way, I know there's tons of women where that's not the case, and they're
Yeah.
totally different than this kind of stereotype. But I do think it's a generality that's true. I've observed it, throughout my life at least.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, those same kind of stereotypes are close at hand for me as well. So maybe that's a different conversation we can have in the future, is something about
yeah,
stereotypes, because there's often truth to that, but then there's always an exception. Just there's so many different kinds of people now, and just people in general,
yeah,
that there's always exceptions. Because I think I relate to that stereotype, especially being a man myself, of it being common for male relationships to not have a lot of depth to them. Not that you don't like the person or something like that, but just the things you talk about. There's certain things that are off limits that you're not going to want to go into, generally speaking. Um, and I think there's a stereotype that that's different for women, but I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of female relationships that are more, superficial at the same time. So it really, for me, comes down to the combination of personalities and everyone's life experience and whatnot. But perhaps there are bigger trends to draw from that. It's just one of those things that's hard to say, because
yeah,
as soon as you try to point something out, boom, there's a contradiction right there. So it gets complex. Um, but yeah, great talk as always. Looking forward to having more of these. If you guys enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. We'll be doing more of these in the future. Feel free to give us ideas in the comments below. If not, just sharing your feedback on things that you agree with, disagree with, um, anything and everything welcome. Also, if you have any thoughts on the format, whether you guys want to see longer videos, shorter videos, we just want to hear from you. We're looking to connect with an audience and share ideas and promote this idea of um, dialogue and exploring topics and thinking more deeply about things. So if you enjoy this, subscribe, and I think you won't be disappointed. Um, yeah, great talk, and we'll see y'all next time.
hey,
We need to have some sort of sign off. And zippity doo dah.
I think we both know that zippity doo dah is the right sign off.
It needs to have
Um,
space.